Click. Good morning, everyone. It's a Monday morning, and this is our Minerals Business and Economic Development Committee meeting. Appreciate you being here on this Monday morning at an early hour. The room is less than full, so if anybody wants to show up, we'll be glad to find them a seat. So welcome, committee members. Hopefully you had a wonderful weekend. Just as a reminder, we have signing with the governor at 1:15 this afternoon for our bonding pool bill that he's agreed to let us be there and take pictures and maybe get a pen from him at the end. So 1:15 at the governor's office. Mark, would you call the roll, please?
Representative Campbell.
Here.
Representative Knapp. Here. Representative Larson.
Here.
Representative Lawley.
Here.
Representative Riggins.
Excused?
Representative Schmidt.
Here.
Representative Tarver.
Excused?
Representative Weber.
Here.
Chairman Heiner.
Here. Thank you. So our first file, Senate file this morning, Senator Case, Trust Code Revisions. If you take the hot seat and introduce yourself for our committee and those that are online, tell us a little bit about it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be here. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Senate File 97, Trust Code Revisions, is brought by the Wyoming Trust Association. I'm accompanied by Kristen Lee, who's their representative here, and on the line is Scott Weaver, who's with the Trust Association. I can't remember exactly what his position is, but he's a practicing attorney in the area of trusts and which is big business in Wyoming, actually. We are a good state to have a trust. We have good laws around the idea of trusts and protecting trusts. We rival states like Delaware, New Hampshire, and Florida for being a good place to have trusts. It attracts people that in their positions in life are able to do wonderful things and use their wealth for good in the future and to enjoy the protection of Wyoming's laws to do that. This bill is really just a amalgamation of a few little changes to the trust code to bring it up to kind of modernize it, maybe give us a little bit of an advantage in one area. There are two substantive changes and the rest are just pretty minor, Mr. Chairman. So, and I'm not an attorney, of course, and there are good attorneys that are co-sponsors on this bill. One of them's on your committee, in fact, and excellent representation by Ms. Lee and Scott Weaver to provide more context. So if it's permissible, I'll just give like the quick overview, and then Mr. Weaver probably would be the best one to talk to you about each and every particular point.
Good. Please proceed, Senator.
Okay, thank you very much. The first major change is on 410-103. It's in the area of qualified trustee. And Mr. Chairman, this goes into an existing part of law that has a list. And it says it's used in this act, qualified trustee as used in Article 5 of this act means, and it's A, that you don't see, is a natural person who is a resident of the state, or B, existing law, a person authorized by the law of the state to act as a trustee or a regulated financial institution, which, and then there's a whole list, and it's maintains or arranges custody in a state, 2, 3, 4. So you got to see how this all kind of fits together. But on page 2, what we'd be doing is going into that list. Remember, the first one is you can be a qualified trustee, a natural person who is a resident of the state, or and B is a person authorized by the law of the state to act as trustee or a regulated financial institution. And the thing is, what we're doing here is to say there was a which was confusing, and we're saying now that conducts one or more of the following activities within the state. The one that we're making a change to is C, and the old language said neither the settler nor any other natural person who is a non-resident of this state, what we want to be clear is we don't want an indirect action to get around, there are things, Mr. Chairman, called a trust company. You can have a qualified trust company, so you can be a trustee, but you can own this entity called the trust company. And what this section is saying, if you can't do it as the direct person, you can't do it indirectly through your trustee company. So there, the new language is neither the settler, either directly or indirectly through an entity, that would be the trust company, unless discretionary distributions by the entity require the consent or approval of one or more disinterested persons who are not related or a subordinate party with respect to the settler within the meaning of this U.S. tax code. And so what it's saying is, if you can't do it directly, you can't do it indirectly. You can, it does provide that you can have, sometimes there's an additional person as a trust officer who in certain circumstances helps to make decisions. And they'll be able to talk about that. As we go on to page 3, we talk about who you have to give notice to. And this is under Part E, and there's actually a definition of who an interested person is. So in other words, it narrows down the people that you should be giving notice to, and we'll come to that. 410, sounds like a good shotgun to me, but we come down and this has to do with just stating what we believe is already the law. No common law rule limiting the duration of a non-charitable purpose trust is enforced in this state, and no common law rule of perpetuities that is otherwise enforced in this state shall apply to non-charitable purposes trusts. There is a specific definition of the length of time in law for a trust to last as 1,000 years for these types of non-charitable purposeful trusts. A big important change is on page 4, and this is a situation, it comes up because there's been a new interpretation by the IRS. So under certain circumstances, the settler, that's the person that makes the trust, the IRS has modified their rules to say that in certain circumstances, if there's a tax obligation of the trust, it falls back on the settler. And this makes it, and the IRS rule kind of says that unless the state rules otherwise, this says, okay, that if in that case where it falls back on the settler, then the trust can actually pay them money. They're not a beneficiary of the trust, right? They set it up, but they're not supposed to benefit from it. But this says if there's a tax obligation that comes out of this relationship, the trust can pay them their taxes or pay the taxes on their behalf. And there'll be more discussion about that, but that's a very important protecting mechanism for the person that makes the trust. That actually continues. There's a lot of language there to accomplish that. Mr. Chairman, that is the new Romanet 33, which is referred to in Part B, which talks about the powers provided in paragraphs, the old paragraph and the new paragraph of this section, and that's all conforming language all the way to the end. I'll be happy to answer any questions that I possibly can. Luckily, I brought real experts, and you have one on your committee too.
Thank you, Chairman Case.
Thank you, sir.
Any questions for the senator? Representative Campbell, please.
Senator,
Yes.
can you
Chairman.
or Mr. Chairman, Senator, if you could, with everything that's changed in page 4 and 5, what happens if the tax liability is in dispute?
Senator?
I have to think about that a little bit. I guess this doesn't change the relationship, Mr. Chairman, of whether it's a disputed tax liability at all, but it does say if the settler accrues this tax liability, the trust can reimburse him for that. I don't think it tips the scale one way or the other on the existence of the tax liability or the dispute. But I suppose it's possible that the settler who accrues the tax liability could dispute that they accrue it. And I'm not sure how that would play out. But it would be kind of between the trustee, the IRS, and the settler, I suppose. But the easiest thing probably, Mr. Chairman, in most instances would be, okay, the IRS says we have the tax liability. We're gonna offset it with this payment from the trust to cover that tax liability. And then it may ratchet down disputes. You wouldn't have as much of a need to dispute it if you could pay the taxes on it. I hope that's helpful, but that's the best I can do. But they can do better.
Okay. Follow-up, Representative? No follow-up. Representative Lawley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Senator Case. Good to see
morning.
you. Is it fair to say that the purpose of this provision is to provide relief for the settler if it's determined? It really doesn't, it really get into how the trust goes about challenging or working with the IRS to determine who pays it, but is to make the settler whole if it's determined that they must pay that liability. Is that correct?
Senator?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a fabulous way to say it. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Any follow-up? Senator, what is the definition of an interested person? It's being utilized here. Could you give me is it somewhere in statute that an interested person is defined?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it's defined in 410-201D. It's a specific, and it's not in your bill. It's in the law, and it's a specific list of who the interested persons are. It's a short list, as I remember.
Okay. So
But they include beneficiary, trustee, I'm sure the settler is in there one way or the other, and it's a short list.
okay. So Senator, could you give me an example where a trustee or where someone may have a tax liability? Can you give me an example of what would cause a tax liability on that we need to be able to be paid through the trust?
Mr. Chairman, I could probably come up with something, but I think it might be more direct and clear if we let Mr. Weaver address that. I think you'd appreciate it, actually, better than me.
Okay, my last question, Senator, non-charitable purpose trust, you said had a 1,000-year limitation. I was told at one time only 25 years. Is it truly 1,000 years for a charitable trust? Oh, this is a non-charitable purpose trust. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm still learning how to read. So a non-charitable trust, but a charitable trust may be 25 years, so.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, there are things that come into play. We have a constitutional provision against perpetuities. We have a common law understanding of perpetuities, and we have a specific statute that for cases like this trust is 1,000 years.
Okay.
And that statute been there quite a while. Not sure I remember it going in.
Okay. All right, any further questions for the senator? Seeing none, thank you very much. Would you like to have Mr. Weaver or Ms. Lee?
Let's stick to Ms. Lee and she'll tell us, but Mr. Chairman, with your leave, I'd like to go chair my committee across the hall.
Well, thank you
We're
for
working on
being
House
here.
bills today.
Thank you for,
Thank you,
you
sir.
have some important work to do, Chairman.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My
Good
name is
morning.
Kristen Lee and committee, and thank you very much for taking up these bills for the Wyoming Trust Association. I think it's in best interest of your time to listen to Mr. Weaver, who's truly the expert, but
Okay,
so if we can let him in.
would you let him in, Tanner? I'm sure the signal takes a while to get to Jackson.
If I could, while we're waiting, Mr. Chairman, an example of a settler, an owner of a ranch, would put the ranch into a trust. And as we were discussing this morning, maybe the beneficiaries of the trust really don't want the ranch. They're gone, they've moved on. And the trust decides to sell the ranch. The tax liability would go back to the settler. And this provision that we're suggesting and proposing today would say, well, the trustee would have the discretion of whether to pay that tax liability or not. To say the tax liability would come out of the trust proceeds, or it could go back to the settler, the person who's put the ranch in trust, where they would sell an asset and then the trust would pay the tax or would put it back with the settler. And I think we're proposing here is to give the trustee that discretion.
All right, thank you. Mr. Weaver, welcome to our meeting.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having me and echoing Kristen's thanks for taking up this bill on our behalf.
Please introduce yourself and then proceed.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. My name is Scott Weaver. I'm the General Counsel and Chief Fiduciary Officer at Willow Street, which is a fiduciary services company out of Teton County. I'm also a former director and current member of the Legislative Committee for the Wyoming Trust Association. So I am an attorney licensed in Wyoming, and by background, I'm a trust, estate, and tax attorney. I think Senator Case did an excellent job summarizing the proposed changes. From our perspective, we think that most of this is cleanup and clarification of existing law. Senator Case was correct that the change to 410-103A Romanet 35C is merely a clarification on what the settler may or may not do via a business entity. And to the question about the new power to discretionary reimbursement of taxes, I think Ms. Lee gave a great example where under the Internal Revenue Code, there's two types of trusts. A non-grantor trust is a trust that stands on its own 2 feet and pays any taxes that it owes. A grantor trust, which is what we're talking about here, is disregarded for tax purposes. The grantor or settler of that trust is still on the hook for the income tax bill, even if they don't retain a beneficial interest in the trust. And so what we're saying is there may be instances where it's appropriate to reimburse the grantor for taxes they pay on behalf of the trust. And that's particularly true if they don't retain a right to use or enjoy the trust property. So they're on the hook for the taxes, even though they can't get access to the funds in the trust. And so, as Ms. Lee indicated, there may be instances where that tax bill is large or unexpected, and it would be a burden on the grantor. So what we've suggested based on this recent IRS ruling is that the trustee ought to have the discretionary power to make that reimbursement as a matter of state law.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Any questions for Mr. Weaver? Representative Schmidt, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Weaver, by cleaning all of this up like this, will this attract more maybe businesses or high net worth folks to Wyoming? Does this make it better for those type of folks and businesses?
Mr. Weaver?
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schmidt, from my perspective, the answer is at the margin, yes. But I think it's more likely that it is merely harmonizing what we've already been doing in Wyoming. So by way of example, for example, Delaware already has a reimbursement provision like this in place. And so there are people who have drafted Delaware trusts. And in reliance on the existence of that law, they've not included this as a power in the trust. And so then if they decide they want to move their trust from Delaware to Wyoming, which of course we would like for them to do, this may be a reason they would choose not to, because then all of a sudden they don't have that power under default state law. And the recent IRS notice that we received says that if you retroactively add this power, then that can be viewed as a taxable gift. And so we don't want that to happen. So the short answer is yes. And the longer answer is, I think it creates an avenue, or it maybe eliminates a barrier to trusts that were settled in other jurisdictions moving to Wyoming over time.
Thank you. Follow-up? No follow-up? Representative Lawley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Mr. Weaver. Could you expand a little bit on, I think, something that was mentioned earlier, but about how this helps the people of Wyoming, ranches, people that have generational wealth that they are trying to protect, manage, and how this change kind of clarifies and helps them?
Mr. Weaver?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, thank you. And Representative, I'd like to first say thank you for your co-sponsorship of this bill. I think this helps the people of Wyoming in several ways. Number one is, from my perspective, this adds a degree of flexibility to our trust code. So it says, if the good citizens of the state of Wyoming or anyone settles a trust and they choose to do so in a particular way based on the tax laws at that time, and there's changes in the tax code or the economic or financial circumstances of the trust, it gives the trustee the ability to use their discretion to reimburse someone for an unexpected tax consequence that's just due to a change in circumstances. So I think that's the most important point here, is it adds flexibility to the administration of the trust. And then secondarily, there is the idea that at the margin, this may result in increased trust business to the state, which is obviously good for the trust industry, i.e. the attorneys, the accountants, the wealth managers, the insurance professionals, and the chartered trust companies who employ folks in the state of Wyoming.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Weaver. So, as was provided by Senator Case in his testimony, he said that Wyoming is one of the most favorable states for trust law right now. So could you tell us what the reason was for bringing this bill? Was it just the change or order from the IRS, or was there some other reason that brought this bill to our attention this year? Is there something that we needed to fix that happened, or just a change in the IRS orders?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question. Historically, the way that we would deal with this is by exercising the existing power to amend an irrevocable trust by non-judicial settlement or by judicial modification. The IRS ruling at the end of 2023 is really what made it urgent, because it said, if you do that, then there may be additional tax consequences. But if the trustee has that discretionary power under default state law, then they will not view it as an additional gift or taxable transfer. So that's really what brought this to our attention.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Weaver? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So Representative Riggins is online.
Great.
I think we all need to say hi to Representative Riggins. So it's wonderful to have you back. Hopefully, Mr. Representative, you're feeling well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Took me a few minutes to figure out how to run the Zoom meeting again. So I was a little bit on the back, a little bit late getting in. So it's great to be here.
Okay, Representative, in order to vote, you're going to have to turn the video on. So if you're still in
I'm trying. I don't know why it doesn't want to work, but
okay, you can work on that. But when it comes to voting time, we have to be able to see you. So.
it
All right.
doesn't say it's off.
Thank you, Representative. We're sure glad to have you back, and we've been missing you. Let's return to Ms. Lee. Any further testimony you'd like to offer to the committee?
Mr. Chairman, briefly to your question about why would we bring this now, what I've learned in representing the Wyoming Trust Association, there's so many different kinds of trusts: charitable, non-charitable, revocable, irrevocable, spendthrift. And I think as these practitioners are in this, they start to really work on harmonizing the statute. So the rule against perpetuities applies here and doesn't apply here. We'll clarify that. The requirements to be a qualified trustee, they start to form that up. And so we end up cleaning this up probably every once in a while. And I think it's just because it's such a technical area of the law, that every once in a while, the practitioners see something that's an incongruity. And so we bring it to kind of clean it up. And then this industry really watches our competitor states, South Dakota, North Dakota, Nevada, Delaware, and really tries to stay ahead of them. They're pretty, my client is a pretty amazing group. And I think that they're always looking at that, of staying ahead of making Wyoming world-class.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Appreciate that. I'm glad that we can be recognized for our efforts. We've done a lot with trust law over the past few years, and it's encouraging that we are recognized for our achievements. Any other questions for Ms. Lee? I have one. You mentioned spendthrift trust. That's something that sounds like for my children. Did I hear that correctly? Is there a spendthrift trust?
There is, Mr. Chairman. There's, yeah, if, Mr. Weaver, please correct me if I get this wrong, if he's still online. It's exactly what you think it is. If you're going to put your assets into a trust and you think to yourself, well, but by 20, they're not going to be responsible for this, but I'm going to hold on till they're 35 or pick a number, and then we'll have the trustee manage it until they become what Grandpa thinks is responsible. And maybe Mr. Meyer can add a little bit too, but yes, that's exactly what it is that parameters around a trust to say, you can spend a little here and a little there, but you can't have the whole thing and manage it accordingly.
Thank you. Mr. Oh, we see Representative Riggins there. Thank you. Good to see you. All right, any other questions for Ms. Lee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Do we have any other elected officials that would like to welcome Senator Crago? Appreciate you being here. Senator Jones is in the back there. Anything you would like to add, Senator? We appreciate you dignitaries being here. All right, any other citizens in the room? Any representatives of business entities? Mr. Meyer, appreciate you coming forward and sharing some of your knowledge with us.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Scott Meyer here on behalf of the Wyoming Bankers Association and as a practicing attorney that's been doing trust work for the last 30 years. Stand in support of this bill. I think that what Mr. Weaver has said, the explanations by Senator Case and Ms. Lee are spot on. I'm just here to tell you that we support it and would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Any questions for Mr. Meyer and the Banking Association? We can't let you off that easy. So, are there many spendthrift trusts that are being written here in Wyoming?
Mr. Chairman, as an attorney, I can tell you I've set up plenty of spendthrift trusts, and they're exactly what you think they are. I want to make sure my kids can do anything they want to do, but nothing. So we want to make sure that we've controlled what they're doing.
I'm going to look more into this spendthrift trust.
Yes.
'Cause it sounds intriguing to me. Thank you very much, Mr. Meyer.
Thank you.
All right, anyone else in the room that would like to testify? Anyone else? Anybody on Zoom? No one on Zoom? With that, we'll close public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure? Move the bill. Moved by Representative Lawley. Seconded by Representative Knapp. All right, do we need to go through the bill line by line? Are there any changes in the bill, any proposed amendments, any discussion? Hopefully you've had a chance to study this bill over the long weekend, 2 days. All right. No discussion? What's your question being called? Members of the committee, this is a roll call vote on Senate File 97, Trust Code Revisions. Mark, would you call the roll, please?
Representative Campbell,
Aye.
Representative Knapp,
Aye.
Representative Larson,
Aye.
Representative Lawley,
Aye.
Representative Riggins,
Aye.
Representative Schmidt,
Aye.
Representative Tarver,
Excused.
Representative Weber,
Aye.
Chairman Heiner.
Aye.
The vote is 8-0 with one excused.
Thank you, Mark. So by your vote, we have elected to pass Trust Code Revisions, Senate File 97, with a recommendation of due pass, which will go to the chamber. Thank you very much for all those that provided testimony on that important bill. As Senator Anderson would say, that barely squeaked by the committee. All right, we'll move on to Senate File 104, Probate Code Revisions. Senator Craigo, welcome.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. Barry Craigo, Senate District 22. It's my pleasure to bring you Senate File 104 this morning, Mr. Chairman Committee. Senate File 104, Probate Code Revisions. It's a bill that also came to us from some of our folks in the legal profession that deal with trust administration. Although the bill looks sort of long, it's actually very, very simple. We're changing a number. And for the most part, there's one other substantive change within the statute, but mostly we're just changing a number. So currently in Wyoming, the small estate number is set at 200,000. And the last time that was changed was, I believe, in 2011, and it went from 150 to 200. And during the summer, I had several folks from the legal profession and trust administration business reach out and say, I think we need to look at raising that number again. Just with, typically when you look at this number, we talk about the standard family when they're doing a administration of probate. You know, it's usually a house and a couple cars. Well, for the longest time, 200,000 would cover that, and we did not necessarily have to go do a full-blown probate to get that taken care of after our loved ones are gone. That's no longer the case. Now it's much more than that. If you have a house, it's most likely a lot more than 200,000. And if you have a couple vehicles or et cetera, it's obviously gonna be more than that as well. And so this bill is just an attempt to simplify the probate process for our folks after their loved ones are gone. When they're taking care of it, if they don't have to go through a full-blown probate, it's much quicker and it's likely much less expensive. And so this bill, as you know, started out, if you looked at the original version versus the engrossed version, it started out at 500,000. The Senate took that number down to 400,000. They thought that was a more reasonable number. We had some testimony about that in committee over there. I think you'll hear probably testimony today that everybody's fine with the 400,000 number. That made a few people feel a little bit more comfortable that 500 might be a bit much. So we took it to 400. And just to walk you through the bill, Mr. Chairman Committee, on page 2, so that number there, that is dealing with the small estate affidavit there at the top. The top of page 3 is the provision relating to small estate creditors. Page 3 down there at the bottom, that's the summary procedure for distribution. Going down on page 4, this is the other substantive change, which is, I think you're gonna see an amendment being proposed by the Trust Association on this disclaimer. This is the other substantive change other than changing the number. And this has to do with disclaimers of interest. Right now, our law lines up exclusively with federal law, and if you don't meet the disclaimer of 9 months under federal law, our law does not allow you to do a disclaimer for other purposes. This just expands that and says, hey, you can still do a disclaimer of an interest after you inherit something, but you have to acknowledge, A, that it's after 9 months, I won't qualify for the federal benefit of that disclaimer, but I can still disclaim it for other purposes. And so it's giving our people who handle these trusts and probates, et cetera, the option of dealing with that in a different manner, which they don't currently have. Moving down bottom of page 4, that's changing the number for ancillary probates. And then the last one on page 6 is changing the number for the sale of non-resident property. And so, like I said, Mr. Chairman, it's a long bill, but mostly it's just conforming. It's just finding all the places where we have to change the number in statute from 200 to 400. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Again, I think we'll have some people, some experts, I should say, in the area hopefully testify about this, or at least one of them from the Trust Association, I believe, might be online. So any questions the committee has, Mr. Chairman, happy to take a swing at it.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Any questions? Representative Schmidt, we'll start on that end.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, do you think the 400,000 is enough? I mean, average home prices anymore are kind of knocking on that door in Wyoming.
Senator?
Mr. Chairman, I do. Obviously I brought the number at 500,000 as a starting point, just for purposes of discussion, but I think 400 will cover the majority of your estates in Wyoming. In the reason being is right now, most folks who are over that 200,000 when they go in for their estate planning are doing trusts. And if you have a trust, you fall outside the provisions of this statute. So what we're really talking about is people who have not set up a revocable trust. And so most folks, we're gonna get most of them, but then this allows us, this is really forward-looking. So what we're saying is, so as folks start coming to their lawyers and say, I need to do estate planning, and as someone who does some of that, I can say, well, what's your house worth? And then it gives us more wiggle room moving forward. I agree. That's why I kind of built it at 500, but whatever it's up to the committee. You get to decide that. It's a bit of a policy choice. I think you'll hear that, there was a little bit of nervousness from some of our institutions, banks, et cetera, that deal with a lot of creditors, because this doesn't only deal with the family. There's some provisions in here for creditors. And so it's a bit of a balancing. At the end, I didn't object to the 400,000 because I understand the concerns with raising it that much in one fell swoop. Maybe a measured approach is okay. We go to 400, see how that works out. And if in a year or two, it looks like we need to bump it up again, it's not that difficult of a process and we can do that. So hopefully that answers your questions.
Thank you.
Representative Lawley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Senator Crago. Always good to see you. I think you just at the end there kind of did this in a way, but I think talking about this, what we just talked about, trusts, and usually we're talking about people with large amount of assets to manage and to work through estate planning and using that tool. This is really for people that, for whatever reason, didn't use that tool, and it's really for these small estates. It really helps out our folks in Wyoming that maybe don't have a lawyer they want to go to, or they don't even think about going to a lawyer, and it does help them manage that process. And we've then really extended that amount of money for them in terms of falling under this provision for small estates. Is that fair to say?
Senator?
Mr. Chairman, that is fair to say. I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, that's what we're trying to do, is just help as many Wyomingites as we can and make this process, easier for their families, really. That's what we're really talking about, because they're no longer here. The folks that own the assets are no longer here. This is trying to help their families deal with this after the fact. That's correct. And a lot of folks, this, a lot of folks don't ever go see a lawyer until it's too late. And so this would affect those people in particular, because some folks don't even have a will, much less a trust. And this would apply to all that.
Any follow-up? Any other questions for Senator Crago? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee.
Any other elected officials that would like to provide testimony on this? There's one back in the back. Senator, nothing? Okay. Any departments of the state? Any citizens in the room that would like to provide testimony? Any organizations? Ms. Lee, thank you. And then we'll go on Zoom.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's what I was hoping, is to introduce the president of the Wyoming Trust Association. Her name is Jordan Chandler. She's a practicing attorney in this area, and she has some comments on the bill, some brief comments.
Okay, all right. Could you bring Ms. Chandler online for us? Another one from Jackson. Seems like we have a lot of trust activity up in Jackson for some reason.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Jordan Chandler, and as Kristen Lee mentioned, I am the current president of the Wyoming Trust Association. On their behalf, I appreciate your time today in considering Senate File 104. Senate File 104 proposes to raise the probate limit from $200,000 to $400,000. As Senator Crago mentioned, the last time this limit was raised was in 2011, and it went from $150,000 to $200,000. We are asking for this current change due to inflation. Inflation, especially in housing prices since 2011, has caused situations where estates above $200,000 must go through probate according to existing law. As an example, a person who does not leave their house to an existing spouse or a single person who owns their home dies. Houses are now worth more than $200,000, and if the estate has a car or other real or personal property, the estate cannot use the summary probate process to easily deal with these assets, and it must involve the court. Raising the statutory amount to $400,000 will be better for families and their heirs to avoid the cost of lawyers and the time involving a court. Raising the limit will be less expensive and more efficient for dealing with assets in estates under $400,000. Under current law, at the $200,000 limit, notice is provided to creditors, and creditors have the opportunity to open a formal probate to have their issues addressed. Raising this amount to $400,000 will not affect these existing rights of creditors. Creditors will still be notified the same. Creditors will have the same right to prove their claims, and we're not asking to change any of the existing procedure or process that would affect creditors' rights with respect to this change. We ask for your support of this change, and I will stand for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chandler. Any questions for Ms. Chandler? Ms. Chandler, could you address the question that was brought up earlier by Representative Schmidt? Why 400 and not 500 or 600? You're right in the heart of things there in Jackson. For with 400, that may not even buy the front door of a house. So what number would you like to see?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, as Senator Crago discussed and mentioned, we started at $500,000 with the understanding that there may be some discussion or negotiation to make all parties comfortable with the amount. So, I mean, yes, 500,000. I, along with the rest of the legislative committee for the Wyoming Trust Association, agreed with the $500,000 increase. That being said, I think we're very happy with the $400,000 increase. I think most parties can agree that the $200,000 amount currently is too low and it needs to be increased to something greater. So 400,000 makes us very happy.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Ms. Chandler? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Ms. Lee,
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Continue, please?
The Wyoming Trust Association does have an amendment today that I think was distributed by your staff. If I could direct the committee's attention to page 4 of this bill, lines 13 and 14, we have our amendment asks that we strike disclaimer at the end of line 13 and strike or at the beginning of line 14. I think in the drafting, we might have got a few too many disclaimers in there. So it would say a written irrevocable disclaimer of an interest in a property that does not otherwise qualify as a qualified disclaimer. We have a disclaimer or qualified disclaimer. I think we can strike that and make it a little more clear. So we caught that in time.
Ms. Lee, could you define what is a disclaimer versus a qualified disclaimer for those of us that are not of attorneys?
No, I can't, but I know Ms. Chandler can.
Ms. Chandler, would you be able to chime in and tell us the difference between a disclaimer and a qualified disclaimer?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to. So a qualified disclaimer, you can think of as a quote unquote tax qualified disclaimer. So as was mentioned previously, a qualified disclaimer is one that is made within the 9-month period required by the Internal Revenue Code. A just plain old disclaimer or non-tax qualified disclaimer is one that is made at any point in time to disclaim assets, but is not made for the purposes of being treated or considered a qualified disclaimer under the Internal Revenue Code. So it would be made possibly after the 9-month period.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman, I have
Ms. Lee.
been helped with this quite a bit by my dear friend Scott Meyer. In the trust world, when someone leaves their children a timeshare, the beneficiaries would say, I don't want that timeshare. That is a headache, it's an expense. I don't want it. I want to disclaim it. And they may not, the timing as referred to by Ms. Chandler, you can disclaim it under the IRS at a certain time. And we're saying flexibility-wise, you can disclaim it when you learn about it or when you discuss it with your spouse and you finally say, we don't want that timeshare. And so I think we're trying to put in here move the effective date differently so that there's more flexibility when people end up in that situation, that they may want to disclaim something.
Thank you. That's a very good example.
Well, that's thanks to Mr. Meyer.
All
I
right.
have to give credit.
Any other questions for Ms. Lee? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Meyer, I see you're antsy to come back up and share some more knowledge with us. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Scott Meyer on behalf of the Wyoming Bankers Association and their trust departments who administer. And as a private attorney who's been doing this for 30 years, I stand by all the comments that were made in the representations to this, but I would point this out. The discussion was, whether this is 400 or 500. Understand that the statute says the value of the property less liens. So you're talking about after there's a mortgage or whatever, so that may actually reduce what you think you have as far as the value and what qualifies. So I think that we can live with 400 or 500. I think the 400 is in there. I appreciate the idea that maybe we had a place to start with 500, but I think that $400,000 will cover an awful lot, and it does make, it does increase the ability to do more of these summary distributions as opposed to a full-blown probate. Our big concern, I think, was, and we've talked a little bit about this, where I've heard the conversations regarding, creditors' rights. Certainly the creditors still have their rights, but if you're talking about an account that has very little money in it or has some money in it, and somebody files a summary distribution to receive that money can go out in a hurry before creditors even get paid. And then there's a question of how do they go back and do that. This does raise that risk some. But I think that for the most part, at least most of the lenders I know are willing to tolerate that as opposed to having something that says, well, we're going to raise it to $1 million. That just doesn't make a lot of sense because I think that increases the risk too much. But I think at $400,000, we certainly can live with that. And like I said, that's for net assets. So I think that this works well for everybody. I certainly stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Any questions for Mr. Meyer? Seeing none, thank you very much
Thank
for your
you.
testimony. Anyone else in the room that would like to provide testimony on Senate File 104? Anyone else? Anyone online? No one online. With that, we'll close public testimony on Senate File 104. Committee, what is your pleasure? Moved by Representative Lawley, seconded by Representative Schmidt. Any discussion? Let's go through the bill, page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4. Yes, Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would propose an amendment on page 4, line 13, strike the word disclaimer, and on line 14, strike the word or at the beginning of that sentence there, or that line.
Do I have a second? Seconded by Representative Weber. Any discussion on Representative Lawley's proposed amendment? Any discussion?
Question.
Question being called. All those in favor of Representative Lawley's proposed amendment on page 4, lines 13 and 14, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That amendment has passed. Any other discussion on page 4? Page 5? And page 6? Any discussion on the bill? Question being called. Members of the committee were voting on, I didn't look up to see if Representative Riggins had any comments. Okay. We're voting on Senate File number 104, probate code revisions as amended. Mark, would you please call the roll?
Representative Campbell.
Aye.
Representative Knapp.
Aye.
Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Lawley.
Aye.
Representative Riggins.
Aye.
Representative Schmidt.
Aye.
Representative Tarver.
Excused?
Representative Weber.
Aye.
Chairman Heiner.
Aye.
8 to 0 and 1 excused.
All right, thank you. So there's no fiscal impact. This Senate File 104 has been recommended do pass, has passed the committee. Congratulations, Senator. Now we'll move on to Senate File 132 and hopefully get a chance to hear from Senator Jones. Welcome, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Stacy Jones, Senate District 13. It's nice to see all your friendly faces this morning. I will just give you a little background of why this bill started. I'm sure this is already familiar to you, Mr. Chairman, but in December, Sweetwater County was experiencing a lot of drone activity above the Jim Bridger power plant there. These aren't small drones. These are giant drones the size of SUVs. About 3 of them would accompany 30 to 50 smaller drones, and they were up there almost every single night. Maybe every night. Cloud cover would prevent law enforcement from seeing them, but they're about 5,000 feet in the air, and it prompted law enforcement to start contacting people to try to figure out why they were there. No one seems to this day seems to know why they were there or if they will be back again. We had many discussions with the governor's office, Wyoming Homeland Security, various law enforcement agencies, including our sheriff's department, Senator Barrasso's office, Representative Hageman's office, and the FAA was contacted, and literally, we still have 0 information on these drones. They have also now been seen in Sublette County over some of the gas infrastructure there. So this seems to be a spreading issue across the state. And I do think it's concerning that once we started looking at it, we didn't have any critical infrastructure defined, and we don't have any set rules as to where drones could be, and really didn't have any way to see if this was a national security issue or what to do about it. So the bill just addresses the use and operation of an unmanned aircraft system, which is what we're calling the drones. It gives parameters, exceptions, penalties, and it authorizes the use of the Wyoming Air National Guard. Section 1 goes over what is an unlawful operation of an unmanned aircraft system. And it just says no person shall operate or use an unmanned aircraft system over or near critical infrastructure or a critical system. So that could be intentionally photographing, loitering over, or taking action to promote or assist or facilitate the commission of a crime. And this bill does not apply to, this part was critical because I think people were worried that we were banning private drones, and drones are used for a lot of things, and the day-to-day appraisers use drones, landmen use drones. So we wanted to make sure that we had some stipulations in here so that we're not prohibiting the day-to-day use of the drones. So a person is authorized to use a drone if they have a FAA compliance, and a governor entity can also use their own unmanned aircraft system. An owner of a property can use an unmanned aircraft system over or near the owner's critical infrastructure. Law enforcement agencies, medical emergency agencies, hazardous materials response teams, and disaster management agencies can all use drones if they need them for incident commands, reconnaissance, training, monitoring, any sort of things that they would normally use a drone. And then also a private landowner can also use a drone on their private property. So let's say if they have oil wells or something on their own property, they are still authorized to be able to use a drone on that. If they find someone guilty of operating a drone, it could be a misdemeanor or a felony, and then those normal charges apply. The law enforcement, this bill does say that law enforcement has the ability to take action to prevent or stop the unmanned aircraft system. And these actions could be disabling, damaging it, or removing it from the prohibited location. It says the governor may order the Wyoming Air National Guard to assist in taking or using reasonable actions to prevent or stop the use. The next section goes over that a person who operates or uses a unmanned aircraft in a manner that's not lawful can also be guilty of a misdemeanor or a felony, and those charges do apply. And then moving on to ensuring public safety, the governor may order any designated person or commanding officer of any military unit to appear without his command to prevent or stop the use of an unmanned aircraft system who is violating the terms of this bill, and to perform other duties as the commander-in-chief may require, as the militia or National Guard may lawfully perform. I can tell you why the critical infrastructure is defined as a petroleum refinery, a petroleum chemical or rubber production, transportation, storage, or processing facility, a chemical manufacturing facility, a water or wastewater treatment facility, an electric generation facility, an electrical transmission or distribution substation, an electrical transmission line of not less than 69,000 volts, an electronic communication station or tower, an energy control center, a distribution operating center, a facility that transfers or distributes natural gas, including a compressor station, regulator station, city gate station or pressure limiting station, or a liquefied natural gas facility or supplier tap facility, any railroad infrastructure or facility, a federal, state, county, chancery, or municipal court, a public safety or emergency operation facility, a federal, state, county, or municipal jail or correctional facility, a federal or state military installation, a hospital that receives air ambulance services, any surface, subsurface, or in situ mining or manufacturing infrastructure or facility. And then it just goes on to describe what a model aircraft and an unmanned aircraft is. And then we also did have one Senate amendment to this, that it added in that, let me find it here, sorry. Any drones that can carry explosives or any type of explosive devices. That was added in because I guess that has been happening in other countries, that they are using the smaller drones and they can be armed. So basically that is the bill, but it's just giving a little bit of beef to our law enforcement and our governor, that if these things start happening regularly, that we can take care of the situation, and we're authorizing them to do that.
All right, thank you, Senator. Appreciate that explanation and for bringing this bill. Questions? Representative Lawley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Senator Jones. Always good to see you. I appreciate this bill. I do remember the situation you had, and it caused not only concern, I'm sure, in your area, but around Wyoming about what was going on and the need for information and concern in general about just what was this about. And so I appreciate you bringing the bill. The one thing I don't see in here that maybe it's hard to do, but is some kind of notice, like when people are, even if they're operating within the bounds of the bill, providing notice to someone, whether it's the governor's office or someone. So, because it seemed like a lot of the angst came from just not knowing, and knowing that there were people in your area trying to contact and get that information. And I can envision a situation for national security purposes or something, there might be difficulty in getting to know that, but in the ordinary course of some of these things where we have all these exceptions, should there still be some kind of notice to someone that those drones will be operating? Thank you.
Senator?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, actually, that's a very good point that we maybe did look over, that if they need to be there for a certain reason, notice would be an excellent thing to have, which we still do not have.
Any other questions? Representative Schmidt first, and then Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Senator Jones. Question on page 5, starting in line forward, talks about the purposes of the subsection, and reasonable actions may include disabling, damaging, or removing the unmanned aircraft. Can you give me an example what that might mean? How would they do that?
Senator?
Well, it is pretty far up in the air, but I am told that there are guns that can shoot it down, but also there's a means that they can drop a net over it. I know our Air Force does have the means to do that. So a net drops over it and then it would bring the unmanned aircraft down to the ground.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Representative Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator. My concerns, I don't see any perimeters set here to where there are a lot of law-abiding drone operators. So what would the parameters be for what is the distance from these facilities as far as miles? You know, what kind of elevation requirements are we looking at? And I know a lot of people that do haul things with drones. You know, it's kind of common knowledge that Amazon's been looking at that, and a lot of people do. So what kind of qualifiers would you put on something as far as the load capabilities of these drones? Thank you.
Senator?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Campbell, I do think that the language that's in here is to not exempt a private drone operator from doing something. I mean, this is intentionally doing these things and loitering over the critical infrastructure and taking pictures and that sort of thing. If you're just a drone operator out there, you know, doing whatever, just taking a video or something like that, I don't think this would apply to you. That it says if you're under FAA regulations, if your drone is registered as the FAA complies you to do, then you would be fine. It's in section, I think the very first part that talks about the FAA. It's on page 3, that if you're authorized by the Federal Aviation Administration to operate or use an unmanned aircraft system. So I think this also would apply to the Amazon delivery as well. Their drones are registered with the FAA, and they would be fine to go and, you know, deliver. If they ever do that in Wyoming, it'd be interesting to see though with our wind, but I think that section would cover them.
Follow up, Representative Campbell.
Okay, how about just Joe Blow citizen? What's gonna keep Joe Blow citizen from getting arrested? No business, no entities, just a private Wyoming resident with his drone, and they're out there fishing on the along the river next to the Dave Johnson power plant. They've got their drone with them. What stops them from being in violation of the law?
Senator?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Campbell, even just an everyday drone operator has to comply with FAA regulations, and you have to register your drone. I use it for real estate, and I had to register. I just have a little drone that can't even go very far up in the air, but just to take pictures, you still have to register your drone. So any citizen would have to comply with that.
All right. Let's go to Representative Riggins first, and then we'll come back to Representative Larson. Representative Riggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions for our guest. Does a complaint have to be filed to law enforcement before any action can be taken under this?
Senator?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, yes, this is only giving law enforcement and the governor the ability to take action. So your average everyday citizen or something like that wouldn't have the ability to take any action on this. So it would have to be reported in some manner to either law enforcement or the governor.
Follow up, Representative Riggins.
Yeah, second question would be, you didn't quite answer Representative Campbell's question about proximity to the facility. So 'cause a lot of these facilities are on public land, compressor stations, gathering field, all pumping stations, all the stuff that's included in here. And I think it's pretty common that people do a lot of filming, maybe for no particular reason. So without a complaint from one of those entities, no action would be taken, I'm guessing.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator,
Representative,
yes.
that's correct. Yes, there would need to be some sort of complaint given as to what the nature of the issue is.
Okay. Any further questions, Representative Riggins? Okay.
No, thank you. I think that will do it.
Okay, Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Senator Jones. So right before session, I believe, or maybe it was during session, first part of session, our governor, chief executive, was meeting with Trump, and I understand he was supposed to get some information within a few days of Trump being in office. And from what I understood, you say that we still haven't got information. And have you had any communication with the governor's office on any communication he's received from Trump since then?
Senator?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawson, I did talk to the governor again about this issue, and he still does not have any answers. Still, no one knows why they're there, what they are. We still have unanswered questions.
All right. Follow-up, Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so I think then this bill, the way I read it, page 2 really gets to the heart of the issue, where they're loitering over the critical infrastructure or critical system. Wouldn't you agree?
Senator?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Larson, yes, I would agree.
All right. Any other questions? Vice Chair Tarver, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry I was late.
And those alarms just don't go off when you need them, do they?
You know, there's a saying, burning the midnight oil, and I was literally doing that, so I apologize. I didn't get done with work last night till early, but anyway, Senator Jones.
We knew you were busy.
Thanks for being here. I see the intention of this bill for sure. And I guess this bill will be the education policy for people that fly drones. My wife is also in realty and she, I don't recall her having to register the small drone, you know, the little teeny ones. But I certainly see the need for this bill. And I would assume when this bill is enforced, people will have a leg to stand on. Is that the purpose of this bill? Because I'm assuming there's loitering taking place now. And I don't know, when you purchase a drone, is there anything to your recollection that warns people about flying over other people's properties, being too close proximity? Is there anything that you know of currently on the books, or is that the intent of this, is to get something in statute?
Senator?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I'll just give you a really quick background that we did have drones flying above our power plant in Sweetwater County. And we're not talking like the average drone that I have or your wife has. We're talking about drones that are the size of SUVs. 3 of them that were accompanied by 30 to 50 additional drones. So that's what prompted this bill. We're not trying to keep your average drone user from out there using it. This is actually, you know, something for national security. We still have no idea why they were up there, and we're trying to start the process of giving ourselves a little bit of ability to do something about it if it were to happen again. I don't believe it's happening right now. I'm unsure if Sublette County is still experiencing it, but it's definitely something that could come back at any moment. They're usually up there about 3, 4 a.m. So we just don't know why they're there, and no one wants to tell us if it's okay or not. So that's the meat of this bill, is gives somebody the ability to take one, bring one down, and maybe at that point we would find out why they are there.
Follow-up? Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so I guess basically there will be some innocent folks get caught in this net, but I would assume there'll be some grace with that, you know, a learning curve. But specifically I can see some ill intent from some naughty children, possibly, you know, dropping M50s or, you know, whatever things they may find. So I certainly understand the intent of this bill, and thanks for bringing it forward.
All right. Representative Lawley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Jones, kind of follow up on that. Really, it's my understanding the law is not well developed with regard to drone activity in general, personal use of their drones, where that line is of invasion of people's property rights, their privacy rights. And this bill isn't really trying to get into all that, because that is a kind of separate policy decision that we haven't really addressed here in Wyoming about drone activity, just to be clear. This does what it does for the reasons that you're concerned you had in your district. And so would you say that's correct, that really we don't have a lot of developed law on the drones and invasion of people's private property and their privacy particularly?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, that's correct. This is really just not for private drone operators. This is for drones that are being used for nefarious purposes. If you just accidentally fly over the top of something quickly or something, that is completely different than being over the top of a power plant for a month at a time or something. This is not just and accidentally went over the top of a gas well or something while you were out, playing with your family in the red desert or whatever.
All right. Any other questions? Senator, 5,000 feet, you said there were about 5,000 feet. And that is pretty close to an airport, the Rock Springs Airport. And to be that high up, it could be dangerous for planes that are flying around at that proximity to the airport. Did they have lights on these drones or any flashing strobe lights or anything at all to be able to identify that they're there?
Mr. Chairman, yes, they did. They did have lights, and the way they viewed it, and they're not sure if this is true or not, but the little ones bumped off of the larger ones, and they think maybe that was like a charging process for the smaller drones. And unfortunately, we actually did have, some of the drones did follow some law enforcement officers back to our jail. So it really was concerning. Does raise the hair on your neck a little bit.
I'm sure. So in this area, there's a lot of railroads, but you mentioned part of the critical structure definition includes railroads, any railroad infrastructure or facility. So just the railroad lines that are out through the desert, or is that considered railroad infrastructure that people could get in trouble for flying over a railroad?
Mr. Chairman, no, I think again, the same thing. If you're maybe running your drone down the whole entire line of it and it gets reported by the railroad, then I think that would be an issue. But if you are just out there, occasionally going over the top of a railroad, it's definitely what the intent is.
Okay. And finally, my last question, Senator, you mentioned that this may still be ongoing in Wyoming. Do we need to consider making the effective date immediately rather than July 1st so that we can take them down right now?
That's a good question, Mr. Chairman. I think we could probably, we do have, I think, one of the law enforcement from Sweetwater County, I think, is here to testify, and maybe he would be able to say whether that was something that could be implemented immediately. I do not have a problem with moving the date up.
I think that's the fastest way to find out who they are, is to take one down. So, thank you. All right, any other questions for the senator? Thank you for bringing this, Senator. We may recall you if we have any further questions, but thank you for your testimony. Any other elected officials in the room? I do not see any government agencies, any departments of the government. Okay, any citizens? Any citizens who would like to testify on this bill about drones? Any individuals representing other entities, business entities? Please come forward. Gentlemen, welcome. Whichever wants to go first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Dave Pickard, representing Continental Resources. We're an oil and gas operator in the state of Wyoming. And believe it or not, this is an issue that we have had, not necessarily in Wyoming yet, but in other locations that we operate in other states. The nefarious activity that some that are opposed to the oil and gas industry have utilized drones to damage our facilities in other states. There's a high potential that some of these are, when you're flying a drone into one of the gas facilities, it's extremely dangerous, not only for our workers, but it's also dangerous for the general public around there. So, Mr. Chairman, it seems odd, but yeah, we are very much in support of this. I would also draw your attention to the list there that, as I represent the telecom industry as well, and it covers some of our telecommunications facilities that are very important to responding to incidents if you're calling 911. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Pickard. Any questions for Mr. Pickard? Mr. Pickard, we have had fixed-wing aircraft fly over these facilities in the past. A lot of them have atmospheric monitoring that different organizations and, maybe checking for components, methane, for example, or other emissions. Do you think it's possible that some environmental organizations may be just checking the atmosphere for pollutants, or is something that they can utilize against these industries in the future?
Well, Mr. Chairman, it's a pointed question, and I would tend to agree that that potential exists out there, not only on fixed-wing aircraft, but also on drones. And that is one of our concerns, is that when you look at page 2, you start talking about the intentional photograph of critical infrastructure systems or loitering. What business do they have up there? We did hear testimony on the Senate side that one of the members of the committee has utilized drones to go out and take pictures of the facilities on his property that are frankly operated by my client, but it's not with intentional harm to be done. He's interested in what the land use pattern is out there. If the company is maintaining all of the requirements that they agreed to as a land use operator out there. So I think the bill covers those personal uses, those incidental uses of drones out there on private property, but it's the intentional language on the first 2 pages that I think is extremely important to this bill.
And if they were doing pictures, Mr. Pickard, it probably wouldn't be at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning.
Mr. Chairman, you're probably correct.
Okay.
It's a little dark out there unless they're using infrared.
Yep. Any other questions for Mr. Pickard? Seeing none, thank you very much. Mr. Obermueller?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pete Obermehl with the Petroleum Association. Support the bill, and thanks to Senator Jones and you all for taking it up. Just two things. One, to follow on your point about flying in the middle of the night. There are fixed-wing aircrafts and perhaps drones that fly patterns in order to measure methane emissions or those sorts of things. But there's a legal way to do that. And in fact, we generally know, we have one of my members who you have met, who's also a pilot, monitors those things because they register with the FAA to fly, and they report their grid patterns and all that. And we generally know when that's happening. It's totally fine and above board and legal. These are not registered drones. Nobody knows who they are in the middle of the night. So that's a little bit different. And just finally, I just wanted to confirm, Senator Jones mentioned it, but yeah, these drones, don't know if they're the same or not, but the same sort of large drone with multiple drones come out have been flying grid patterns over oil and gas facilities in Sublette County.
Thank you, Mr. Obermueller. Any questions? Mr. Obermueller, I know of a lot of individuals in my neck of the woods that would love to be able to shoot at these things and legally do that. Do you see anything in here that would allow a citizen to be able to take his 50 caliber out there and just try to bring it down?
Mr. Chairman, that's not my read of the bill.
I was just hoping.
I wouldn't advise it.
All right, Mr. Bush, thank you for being here.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure how to follow that. David Bush with Black Hills Energy, also in support of the bill. I don't want to repeat what my colleagues have already stated. We've got, as you all know, a lot of infrastructure between our electricity generation facilities up in Gillette and Campbell County area and the mine, power lines, natural gas facilities all over. And although my folks haven't reported seeing anything yet, it seems like it's only a matter of time before something potentially happens. So we are in support of the bill for all the reasons that have been stated already.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bush. Any questions for Mr. Bush? Mr. Bush, with your power lines, you use drones quite a bit, don't you, to inspect high voltage power lines?
Mr.
The
Chairman, we
insulators?
do, yes. We generally contract with third parties and have them use their drones to check lines. As this committee has heard, check fire mitigation areas, things like that. It is a useful tool, and we certainly know who they are and what they're doing when they're flying around up there. So that's something that we are comfortable with the bill, of protecting that ability to still use those third-party contractors for that kind of stuff.
So Mr. Bush, if you're inspecting one of these high voltage power lines and some citizens see that and they think, well, this is a nefarious drone that falls under this regulations, how would they know that this is actually one of your contractors and not some nefarious person, individual or entity actually doing what we're seeing here with some of these infrastructure? How would we know the difference?
Mr. Chairman, generally, my understanding is we try to communicate with landowners, in particular, if we're going to be flying over their land with a drone and have an inspection going on or something like that, we will reach out and make sure they know who is flying the drone and what the purpose of that flight is. So communication in general, I mean, yeah, I guess you could have a neighbor look over and say, hey, there's somebody flying a drone over Fred's house, and call the authorities or something like that. But we try to do the best communication we can to let people know we'll be operating in the area.
Okay, thank you. Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To follow up, Mr. Bush, good morning, by the way, gentlemen. Good to see
Good
you.
morning.
Would some kind of reporting process that could be accessed by others, landowners, et cetera, that whether it's an online, something people go and report that what they're gonna be doing with their drones, what their purposes are, would that help? Would that help for the questions and the wondering if this is official, something appropriate under the law or not? Do you see that as having some value, or am I kind of out on a limb there?
Mr. Bush?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, potentially, yeah. I think the more information we can have out there, the better. I let my friends and colleagues here also address that, but any opportunity that we have to communicate and make sure people know what's going on, I think is a positive. But
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
can I
Mr.
follow up on that?
Obermiller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley. I think Mr. Bush is correct. It would be, it's a lot easier to do at a fixed location. The bill does include pipelines, and we have, tens of thousands of miles of pipeline in Wyoming. And we'd have to think through pretty carefully how reporting could work, given that, just the sheer volume of what that would look like in Wyoming. And I'm just not sure how we would solve that.
Follow up? Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good point. Thank you for that. And would something, if it was broadly, like reporting, over these weeks or whatever, we will be doing drone activity in this sort of area, large area, like something very general, but kind of just gives people that sense of, okay, we kind of know what's going on there. Would that work maybe with the pipeline? Is there a way to do it, to accommodate that, to not be so specific?
Mr. Obermiller?
Mr. Chairman, thanks, and Mr. Picker may have some additional thoughts here. It's theoretically possible. I would have to go back and get with my
sure.
midstream guys and kind of talk that over a little bit. Other states may have done something like that. I don't honestly know, Representative Lawley, but I'd be happy to do a little more legwork on that.
All right, one more follow-up.
Representative.
Do any of you see any potential exceptions we might need to have in that for issues of confidentiality or areas in a company where there's, we would need to be careful that they might not want to report that they're doing on their own property, that might be some kind of a, again, confidential or what even might fall into the sort of trade secret kind of area. So we would need some kind of language like that. I mean, I'm not proposing we're doing anything on the fly today, but I may want to work with the bringer just to see if there is a possibility of some kind of a notice that might also help a little bit in this area, but doesn't do harm. So if any of you could speak to that.
Do I see any takers?
Sure.
Mr. Pickard?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, I think you bring up some good points, but I think the intent of this bill is really based in common sense. And if you have, two answers here. One, we may need to be flying our pipelines or our facilities on a minute's notice. There could be some incident that happened out there that we, not only in an unfortunate incident, you're going to want to have 911 called first to respond to that incident, but we also might want to be flying it as well, especially if it's a pipeline. So advanced notification would be pretty challenging, I think, in that sense. But I think going back to the common sense approach to this bill, and it's not perfect. We're not working in a perfect environment, otherwise we wouldn't even see this bill. I think the first line is that if anybody sees a drone activity out there that seems out of place, they're going to call law enforcement. And the next thing that law enforcement is going to do is try and notify or communicate with any of the owners of that critical infrastructure to say, hey, we've had this report. Are you seeing it? Also, we wanted to give you a heads up. We want, and that gives the operator the opportunity to say, oh, sorry, that's our guy up there right now. And that's why he's loitering above our facility. We're taking pictures. So an advanced notification, I think, would be challenging. It's something that if we put this bill into place and we see some challenges there, I would hope that law enforcement, I do believe law enforcement's on the line for some remote testimony. And I think they'll answer that, look, they're going to use common sense and say, we're not going to go out and apply these penalties in a situation where they were up there doing good things rather than nefarious things.
Thank you, Mr. Pickard. Thank you. Any other questions for this trio? Thank you very much. Seeing none. Anyone else in the room that would like to provide testimony on Senate File 132? Seeing none, let's go online. Mark?
Kelly Carpenter.
Ms. Carpenter, welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, very well. Please proceed.
Thank you. Thanks again, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Kelly Carpenter, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. Our membership supports this bill. Understanding it directly relates to protecting critical infrastructure. Our members are concerned with the increasing prevalence of drones, and our members are often the landowners surrounding these spaces. Specifically speaking of railroads, highways, electrical infrastructure, and the like. We appreciate how this bill addresses drones and the potential danger they could pose to critical infrastructure and surrounding areas, especially those loitering, as mentioned, referred to in the bill. Additionally, we appreciate the efforts to address keeping private drone operators outside the purview of this bill. We support the bill and hope it continues to move forward. With that, I will take any questions you or the committee may have.
Thank you, Ms. Carpenter. Representative Weber, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Carpenter. I have a question about, for your members, has any of the members reported anything any of the members reported anything with use of maybe drones flying over their cattle operations that you're aware of?
Ms. Carpenter.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Weber, yes, we have had some reported incidences that I've heard in conversation, yes, at various scattered points across the state as well.
Follow up?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Yeah, that would be my concern, because when I think of critical infrastructure, yes, I think of pipelines and railroads and power plants and things like that. But I also think of our food supply is very critical. And I know some people don't really like our Western way of lifestyle here with cattle. So, thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. Carpenter? Ms. Carpenter, this bill doesn't particularly address farmers and ranchers as critical infrastructure. We had another bill that was trespassed by drone that would have addressed your situations more thoroughly. Do you see a need to push legislation for trespass by drone for ranchers and farmers and private individuals that they may have drones flying over their private property?
Mr. Chairman, yes. Yes, that is a very big priority for our members. Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. Okay, any other questions for Ms. Carpenter? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Go on to the other one.
Rich Fisher.
Rich Fisher.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, please proceed.
Okay. Thank you. I represent the Sweetwater County Sheriff's Office on behalf of Sheriff Grossnickel. He couldn't be here today to testify. We do support this bill. We support the legislation that with the drone sightings that we've had and have been dealing with since late last year. Any type of legislation which provides us enforcement ability to drones that would be trespassing or flying over critical infrastructure. I'd like to note that our most recent report came on February 10th of this year, and that was made by an AirMed helicopter pilot. AirMed is the medical flight service out of the University of Utah that services our area and is typically stationed at our hospital. They reported seeing these unmanned aircraft flying anywhere between above and below them. They were between 1,200 and 1,500 feet, and they saw 7 to 10 of these unmanned aircraft being flown about 10 to 20 miles northeast of Rock Springs. None of these drones or unmanned aircraft came within a close distance to the helicopter, but the pilot did report seeing them. They did have lights, were varying in altitude with rapid descent, rapid increase in altitude. And so they're still continuing. To this day, we still don't know what they are or who's piloting them, although the pilot did report that these were large and not the kind that you would buy off Amazon or Walmart or Target, but a large unmanned aerial system was his description. And with that, I'd stand for any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you, Officer Fisher. Any questions for the officer? Representative Larson, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fisher, earlier it was brought up by the good chairman about the effective date. Do you have any opinion on that? Should we make that effective immediately so that you guys have the tools needed to address this as soon as possible?
Officer Fisher.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, yeah, the effective date, as soon as it could become effective, would aid law enforcement's ability in enforcing any violation of this proposed statute. However, with the current drones that we're dealing with, I know, questions were asked about us being able to shoot down the drones. We don't have the capabilities based on what it's been reported as the altitude that they're flying at various times. But I think having this statute enacted immediately would provide law enforcement as well as perhaps the governor's office to take action and try to determine what the purpose of these unmanned aircraft are.
Thank you, officer. I have a 50 caliber cannon that sits on my mantle. Maybe I could help out when that gets to that point.
Perhaps, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Fisher. I have a question. What exactly would your process look like for somebody reporting drone sightings to you, and what would you do?
Officer Fisher.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Weber, upon notification of a drone sighting or report such as we've been taking, we generally drive out into the area, try to determine what might be going on, make contact with anybody who may be out there, specifically piloting an unmanned aircraft system or a drone, determine who they are, what their purpose is, contact our reporting person, whether it be an agency, somebody else, or a business, determine whether or not this person had authorization to be flying where they're flying, provided that it's private land and not public land. Probably warn them, especially with any new law, warning them of the current statute, trying to determine their intent, and then most likely forwarding a report to the county attorney's office for consideration of charges, if it was warranted.
Follow-up, Representative Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Fisher. As a follow-up, are you in contact with your airport in that area to find out any communications when these drones were? Two questions. One, from the past, when you saw the drones, did you talk to them? What did they say? And then in the future, if this bill is to be passed through, how does that look when so many people have made some comments that they just really don't know what's going on?
Officer.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Weber, we have been in contact with our airport personnel. They don't have any idea what these things are either. They're not showing up, according to them, they're not showing up on radar. They're in the dark just as much as we are. I know the sheriff has reached out to our senators and our representatives at the federal level. They too are unsure of what these things are that are flying, and to date we've had no answers to that.
All right, thank you. Representative Riggins, I see your hand up. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fisher, and that you answered this partially already. I was wondering how this legislation would change your response had it already been in place in February or the other times in the Sweetwater area where these sightings were. What could you have done differently if this legislation was in place at that time?
Officer Fisher, please.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Riggins, really everything that we've been doing is the same type of thing we would do. What this legislation would allow is if we were to get answers and find out what is being piloted or being flown over the area of our power plant east of town, it would give the ability for some enforcement action to be taken should we find, that it does have a criminal element to it, or that they're trying to damage or do something to the power plant and the critical infrastructure that's in place.
Follow up, Representative Riggins?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. Representative Weber?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Fisher. When you were out after you had seen these drones flying around, were you able to find anybody that you could ask were you able to identify anyone that you thought maybe or looked suspicious, or just anybody flying a drone at 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning or any of those times?
Officer Fisher, please.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Weber, none of our deputies have been able to locate anybody who was piloting these aircraft. We've searched the area. We've looked on off ramps along the interstate because they're generally operating north of the interstate. Certain times they've been witnessed over both Green River and Rock Springs, but our deputies, law enforcement, we haven't been able to find anybody specifically out by the power plant. We were hoping that it would be easier to spot somebody who's parked and make contact with them, but we're unable to make contact with anyone.
Follow up, Representative Weber.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fisher, were you able to implement any use of infrared or night vision?
Officer Fisher?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Weber, we've tried our night vision. Our night vision does not have the capabilities to get a good view with this. We have tried the FAA registered drone apps. We've driven to the area. Deputies have seen the drones, but there's nothing coming across the drone app to indicate that these unmanned aircraft are registered with the FAA.
Thank you.
Officer Fisher, are these drones in the area for extended period of time, number of hours, or are they just there for a little while and then they take off again?
Mr. Chairman, from what the deputies have reported, they're actually there for several hours, usually appearing anytime after midnight, more specifically, usually closer to 2 a.m., and then they're gone by first light or by dawn.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Tarver. You'll come back.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Fisher, thanks for being here. I'm going to take this in a little different direction. Have you had any complaints from ranchers and or landowners of harassing cattle and or wildlife? And if so, I got a follow up to that.
Officer Fisher?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Tarver, no, we have not had any reports of drones over any of from the ranchers, any cattle operators. The only other drone complaint we took was from a private landowner, and this was early last year or maybe in the spring of last year, in which he had concerns that a realtor was flying a drone near his property and had concerns about that. With that one, we made contact with the realtor, who was parked right in front of the property that she was trying to get drone footage of. Had a discussion with both and determined that she was just in the course of doing her job flying the drone. The landowner was just concerned that it was near his property and didn't like the potential for invasion of privacy with that. But that worked out fine, and there was no criminal charges even developed with that.
Follow up, Vice Chair?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I do. So that being said, I have heard of some complaints in this vicinity or this area, and I was wondering on page 2, if you think it would be a friendly amendment to add a Romanet 4 and add harassment of wildlife and/or farm animals. And I'm just curious if you think that would strengthen the bill or if it is unneeded.
Officer Fisher, please.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Tarver, I think any clarification or definitions that can be added to really tighten up the bill would be beneficial for law enforcement. And I do agree that I think the ranching industry in the state, I think it is a critical infrastructure as well, and that anything we can do to support all infrastructures with the purpose of the drones and what can be done with the drones, I think would be beneficial.
Vice Chair Tarver.
Just a quick follow-up to that, Mr. Chairman, and the only reason I'm saying this is, and I'm sure no one would ever think to do this, but say you have state and/or federal lands and you're a hunter, it has been said that perhaps they might use drones to drive the wildlife into the area where they could shoot them, and that's really my purpose of this. I've heard some of this, and I don't know, I guess you haven't seen or heard of this, but that was my intention here on this.
All right, thank you. Representative Lawler, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, Officer Fisher. I really appreciate it. You shed some good light. I want to kind of go a direction about the drones that were reported in the Rock Springs area that were so concerning, and the size of them, the capacity they seem to have. My understanding is those kind of drones typically are, can be managed and directed from a great distance away. In other words, we typically think of drones like we might have, small drones, and that we have to be within a certain distance to operate that drone. But this size of drone, I think it falls in a different category. We're talking about the size of an small SUV. And so could you speak to that about what are some of the possibilities in terms of how far away the person operating that drone physically could be from the drone that you're seeing there in Rock Springs? Could you address that?
Officer Fisher, please.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Wally. Yes, everything that's been reported is that these are large unmanned aircraft. It's been reported as the size of an SUV, a small car, an unmanned aerial system, which, if you look at the types that are utilized by the military versus what is typically purchased by people at, off Amazon or even Walmart, I think they can be operated at great distances. The operators of these systems may not even be in the state of Wyoming. We don't know. I can tell you that, what was first reported by several of our deputies when we first started getting these reports, that they went out, they investigated, they saw the drones or what they thought were maybe drones. And then on their way back into Rock Springs, and we're talking, the power plant sits about 30 some miles east of us. They were followed back in by a couple of the drones. So the flight time that these things already had, plus following them back in 30 some miles back to our sheriff's office, the flight time is considerable. So it does hold that these things are quite large and capable of great distances. Therefore, they can probably be piloted from great distances away.
All right. Thank you, officer. So with these small drones that you buy over the counter, they are line of sight. With these larger ones, there's no, are you aware of any laws that require line of sight for those? Otherwise, you'd have to have a pilot's license. Is that not correct?
Mr. Chairman, my understanding is you would have to have a pilot's license. We have our own drone program here at the sheriff's office, and all of our operators had to become pilots. They have pilot licenses for the drones, and that's through the FAA and through the FAA regulations. And so I would imagine that whoever is operating these should have a pilot's license. But again, we have no idea who it is, and nothing's been reported to us, even though it's been in the news. Nothing's been reported to us by any type of organization indicating that, the purpose or that they're the ones piloting these and what the purpose of that is.
All right, thank you, officer. Any other questions for us, Officer Fisher? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony. Appreciate this.
Thank you.
Mark, anyone else on Zoom? With that, we will close public testimony. Members of the committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by Representative Larson, seconded by Representative Lawley. Any discussion? Vice Chair Tarver.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to propose an amendment to page 2 and add a Romanet 5, or excuse me, 4, and harassment of wildlife and or farm animals. And just kind of leave it somewhat vague like that. I mean, I think that would at least give, you know, you could call the sheriff's department and they could come out and then they could determine what the individual is up to.
Do I hear a second? Seconded by Representative Weber. Any discussion on Representative Lawley, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do support this amendment, but I do think also the legislature eventually needs to address the issue of trespass by drones. And we didn't get it done this session, but it really gets into this area. But I think this amendment is good here. It helps the issue along, but we still need to address trespass by drone.
All right, thank you, Representative Lawley. The other question we might need to discuss is the title. It says the title is Protecting Critical Infrastructure and Systems from Drones. So harassing wildlife or farm animals, is that going to be germane? Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, while I support the amendment and the idea behind it, I'm not sure if it fits within the title of the bill. So that's my only concern. But I mean, we've amended titles in the past, so that's always an option.
Representative Weber.
I'm not really sure. How would we amend that on the title? I mean, I'm looking for some suggestions. I think it's important.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think we could pass an amendment conceptually and allow our LSO the leeway to amend the title appropriately. And that'll allow the lawyers to make sure we have the right language and maybe even tie it to other language that's used in statute already.
Any other discussion? Okay. Do I hear a question? Question being called, where members were voting on Representative co-chair or Vice Chair Tarver's proposed amendment on page 2 to insert a Romanet number 4, harassment of wildlife or farm animals. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. And/or.
Yeah, you said and.
And/or. Okay, harassment of wildlife and/or farm animals. Okay. All right, going on to page 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I was going to do 9, 10. Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, I will propose an amendment at this time. I'll move an amendment to change the effective date to immediately.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by everyone. Seconded by Vice Chair Tarver. Any discussion? Question being called. We're voting on page 10, proposed amendment by Representative Larson to make the effective date immediately. And there's some LSO language that goes with that, immediately upon, and there's some other things that go with that, so. All those in favor of proposed amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that amendment passes. Any other discussion on Senate File 132? Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I just want to thank Senator Jones for all of the footwork she's put into this over the last few months. She's really been on top of this and tried to make sure that our community is informed. And so I just appreciate all the work she's put into this bill and bringing it to us as an option to defend our state. And I think before session, she was getting me fired up, and I wanted to bring an amendment to the budget or even put it in the bill to buy an F-16 or something so we could shoot it down, but figured that may be a little extreme. So, but maybe not. Maybe that's a committee of the whole amendment that I could bring as well. But Mr. Chairman, I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of this bill and looking forward to carrying it on the floor if you allow. So thanks.
All right, thank you. Any other discussion on the bill? Question being called. Members, we're voting on Senate File 132, Protecting Critical Infrastructure and Systems from Drones, as amended. Mark, would you call the roll, please?
Representative Campbell.
Aye.
Representative Knapp.
Aye.
Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Lawley.
Aye.
Representative Riggins.
Aye.
Representative Schmidt.
Aye.
Representative Tarver.
Aye.
Representative Weber.
Aye.
Chairman Heiner.
Aye.
The vote is 9-0.
All right, so this committee has recommended a due pass for Senate File 132 as amended. Senator Jones, who would you like to carry this on the floor? You've got one volunteer, but you've got a lot of people as co-sponsors in the House. Okay, well, congratulations, Senator Jones. As Senator Anderson says, it squeaked by. All right, that concludes our business for the day. Thank you, committee. It's nice to have a full committee. This is Representative Riggins. Welcome back. We appreciate your input today.
Good to see you, JR.
Maybe we'll see you in a couple of days down there.